Good afternoon, Frank. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. You look excellent. I'm seeing Wall Street Noah right now. So you're looking good, man. I know you're in high tide for business. Business is really picking up. You're working 60, 80-hour weeks. You look good. You and I were just talking off camera. So today I want to say hello to everyone who's watching. Today we have with us once again Robert Drysdale, Jiu-Jitsu legend, particularly a Jiu-Jitsu legend here in America, one of the most accomplished Americans at submission grappling, Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, former winner of the 80cc submission grappling absolute division. That's a very prestigious, one of the most prestigious titles in the sport. Robert gave me my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in June 2010. That was one of the best moments of my life. We have no photographic nor video evidence of that day, which is a crime, which if I could beat Robert up, I probably would over that. It was such a surprise that we don't have any video or photo of it. It's just etched in my memory. But anyway, we had Robert on, I think probably like within the last maybe 2 months ago or so, we had him on. We had a great podcast with him, and we had him on again because Robert just gave a TEDx talk here in Las Vegas. I helped Robert get that TEDx talk. I helped him write his speech. I helped him with practicing his speech. I was there at the live event. It was a big deal. Robert makes some admissions. So if you're a fan of jiu-jitsu, if you're a fan of MMA, Robert was an MMA fighter, I believe, retired 7-0. So he didn't have a long career, but was unbeaten. A lot of first round submission wins. He did fight in the UFC. But it's, if you're a fight fan, if you're a jiu-jitsu, you're going to want to watch that TEDx talk. But even if you are not, if you're someone who's interested in the process of, hey, how do I get a TEDx talk? How do I write a TEDx talk? What's the process like the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the challenges, how nerve-wracking it can be, right? What does that process look like? How do you show up on stage and be confident and conquer your nerves? We're going to talk a lot about that today with Robert, but you're also going to want to watch it because we talk, Noah, a lot now today about authenticity. We talk about vulnerability. These words are mainstream words now. Everybody's talking about mindfulness, authenticity, vulnerability. And Robert Drysdale, 6'3", 240 pounds, a guy who's been, in this alpha, one of the most alpha ecosystems on earth. He's been in that ecosystem. He's trained in it. He's a product of it. And he goes on stage and he makes, he speaks from the heart. He makes some admissions. If you think you know Robert Drysdale, you probably don't know everything. Like, life has been challenging for him too. He's had to go through the darkness. He's had to battle with some depression. He's had to battle with, winning and then the depression after winning. Like, there has to be something more. Is this all there is? If I'm winning all these medals, I'm winning world titles, I thought it would feel better. I thought it would last longer. And then, as Robert said on stage, beyond Robert the fighter, right? Beyond that, what's my identity? Like, if fighting was taken away from me, if jiu-jitsu was taken away from me, what's my identity? That's really the core. He talks about that transformation and going from just this type A athlete, ultra competitive. You and I have talked about it many times on the podcast too, Noah, where it's a double-edged sword, right? You have someone like Robert and I who are just wired to be ultra competitive, who hate losing, and yet you have you have to deal with the fact that one day the cheering is going to stop. One day the cheering is going to stop. One day your body's going to betray you. One day you're going to slow down. One day it's time for a new generation. One day you're not what you once were. And how do you adapt? What do you do then? How do you recreate yourself? How do you find a new identity? How do you find purpose and meaning when all you've known, that your identity has been as an athlete, as a medal chaser, and so that's what this TEDx talk was about. I understand that Robert has just joined us, so
I'm ready to
be talking about today.
Good stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and bring him over because he's just in the green room right now.
Okay.
All right.
We have a green room now.
Yeah, we have a green room now. So Robert's been waiting patiently over in the green room. And Robert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Just to let you know, Robert, we're live. Frank took the moment, a few minutes, to just kind of warm up with an introduction. And so welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me back. This is what, my third one with you guys now?
Second with me. Maybe.
But you did one with me. You did one with me separately a while back. This is my third one with you. Maybe four. You and I may have done 4 together.
Yes, I think this is 4 with Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm sandwiched by bearded, Neanderthals. I feel like I need to grow a beard. I feel like less of a man now today on Sunday. So that's, it's bearded Sunday.
It does have its advantages.
Yeah. Well, Robert, I was telling everybody, you and I went through that TEDx process. What's interesting, and this, I don't mean this to sound braggy, but it's kind of true. It's like, of all the TEDx's out there, right? There's 10,000 or tens of thousands of TED or TEDx talks out there. And it is prestigious to get one, because it's not easy. Not just anybody on a street corner can get a TED or a TEDx talk. So it is, it's hard to get it. There's a lot that goes into it. What's interesting is when it comes to like Jiu-Jitsu and the combat sports and MMA, you and I, like, looking at the screen right now, we're like 50%, maybe like 40% of all the TED or TEDx talks in the world on combat sports, maybe 30%, somewhere between 30 to 40% is like right here on these 2 screens, which is pretty crazy. 2 guys in Las Vegas that happen to train jiu-jitsu. So it's pretty.
There's a stereotype. It's not only very inaccurate, it doesn't really do justice to the theme of fighting, is that fighting is just purely physical and brutal and pure aggression. It's primal, and because it is primal, therefore it cannot be intellectual, and nothing could be further from the truth, right? So I think that's one reason why I think that if you dug deeper into what fighting is, you would find it to be one of the probably the most intellectually challenging things you can ever get involved in. Like I have a hard time thinking of anything more complex than fighting. I really do. Like I mean, when you think about the different layers what the different layers you have to have in your, you have to dig through to be able to be a good fighter. Like, it's physical, it's emotional, it's technical, it's tactical. It is very, very challenging in every single way. Like, so I have a hard time thinking of anything that is as challenging as fighting. But for some reason, I think that the overall stereotype is still like Hulk smashed, right? Like, you're an ogre who just knows how to break things. You can't put things together, sort of thing. But I think these TED Talk helps break that stereotype, perhaps.
Isn't that something more like, who thinks that chess is not an intellectual activity? But chess, is a training board for tactical warfighting. And that's what the mats are. The mats are nothing more than a game board for chess. So I tend to think that any of the martial arts is some of the most intellectually demanding activities, because you open up deeper levels of your cognitive processing on the mats than anywhere else, in deeper forms. Your body creates neural pathways that are indelible at that point. So it's actually I think it's the most opposite thing. I think I could say that football or anything with bats and balls are kind of less so.
Yeah, the fascinating thing about wrestling, jiu-jitsu, any combat sport is that it's a hybrid. It's a team sport, right? You need your team, you need your coaches, you need people to show up, and you're helping each other, your coaches are helping you. And then at the same time, just like wrestling, just like high school wrestling, college wrestling, you're going out there alone in the end. And so you can't hide. Like, if you're on a soccer field and you're having a bad day or you got beat, a lot of times you can kind of hide. It's like, oh, the team lost. In fighting, it's like, you know, everything, when you step out there, usually everything is riding on you. So the emotional, the spiritual, the emotional, the mental challenge is like 10x of most sports, because you can hide a little bit in other sports. It's on everybody. There's a beauty of team sports, but at the end of the day, the other thing is you can go to the ER room in these sports. I mean, you know, you can go, you're probably in most sports, you're probably not going to the ER room for a bad day at the office. You're just your ego's gonna get bruised, but you're not gonna get your arm snapped or you can get dumped on your neck, and your neck's never the same. So because of that, consequently, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the whatever, on top of, like Robert's talking about the whole package too. It's like the intellectual chess game. And, you know, we had a couple of weeks ago, we had Tom DeJarnett, who was a commanding officer of the Navy SEALs. We had him on, and he was saying, just anecdotally, by happenstance, he was saying, hey, a disproportionate number of Navy SEALs seem to be chess players. Like, these are very tactical, strategic, warriors. And a lot of them are now. I would say Robert is much more of the chess player than I am. Like, Robert is one of those guys who, I've said this before, even when there wasn't YouTube, right? Even before YouTube, Robert was sitting there dreaming up moves or going to a tournament when you couldn't, right now, you can go watch the World Championships on YouTube and you can rewind it 1,000 times in super slow motion and see everything the guy did. When Robert was competing and all, it's like, you just got, like, even if you were watching or scouting a competitor, it was like your brain had to remember, and you had to use deductive reasoning and other things to figure out, wait, how did he do that? And you had to really troubleshoot that. So but for me, my thing was, Robert was talking about Hulk smash. My thing in my prime, when I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s, wrestling and doing a little bit of boxing. My thing was really, I wasn't as much of a technician or a chess strategist. I was really just like, I want to win more than the other person. And I'm just going to break you and impose my will. A very American mindset, bigger, faster, stronger. I just want it more. I don't care how good his technique is. I got a better gas tank. I want to win more. I'm tougher. And that's not a guy like Robert Drysdale. That's why when I met Robert in Vegas, 2008, 2009, I think it was. And remember, Robert, I've told this story before, but it's worth telling again. He's sitting there. His wife then, Michelle Nicolini, who's phenomenal, multiple-time world champion. She's there. I'm training with her. He's on the sidelines. I'm on some guy's back, and I'm looking. I guess I'm a brown belt, but I'm looking pathetic. And Robert's probably sitting there like, God, like, this guy could just do this. So he comes over, shows like an arm bar from the back, right? Like this, and nimble. I mean, Robert's like 215, 220 pounds then, and he's on the back and he transitions to this arm bar, not super sophisticated to him, but to me, I hadn't seen the details of it. And this guy's 80 pounds heavier than me, and he's more, more nimble and whatever. And then that's when I say, like, Robert opened my mind to, like, what I say the real jiu-jitsu. It's like, wow, this is the chess game of jiu-jitsu. Anyway, Robert, what your thoughts taking this further?
I think that's what initially a number of things attracted me to jiu-jitsu. Speaking for myself, I think that people are looking for different things, but I think that one, I like the idea of being dominant. It's having that association with that tough guy kind of, perception that people might have had of you. Like, in my teens, that appealed to me a lot more than appeals today. Today, I look at it and I think it's quite pathetic. But when you're 16, these things mean the world to you. And there was this thing in Brazil. They were like, they call them the pit boys, right? They were basically hooligans. They would go to nightclubs and get into fights, and everyone was terrified of them. And they were, the jiu-jitsu guys were known for being the pit boys, right? They were the jiu-jitsu crowd. So when I was like 16, 17, and I had just started training, like, me and my friends would put on jiu-jitsu shirt on, and we would go to a nightclub. And we would walk around, and the bouncers would be chasing. They'd be following us around because they were so scared we were going to get into a fight. They would literally have like 5, 6 bouncers like walking right behind us, just ready to like jump on us in case we got into a fight. So we're basically walking around with like what looks like private security. So everywhere we go, like people are making way for it, and it's super idiotic now that you look back. It's so, I mean, what's the point of any of that? But when you're 16, these things are really important. Like I got a kick out of being like that badass and like, oh my God, look at me, everyone's scared of me, right? And I think that was an initial motivation. Then I found something else. Then, like I found that I enjoyed winning. I enjoyed competition. I spoke a little bit about this on my TEDx. Like I found like a mean to express ambition and perhaps a bit of a frustration as a teenager, not being really good at anything. I pretty much sucked at everything I ever did. And then I found Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to be good at this. But you dig deeper, and there's another layer in the onion, and you go, oh, wait a second, this is like really, really smart. Like this is not just two cavemen going at it. This is chess with the body. In fact, like going back to the chess analogy, I've made this analogy before. I think chess is simple in comparison. The chess players don't want to hear this probably. I had a friend of mine in college. He was a chess master, right? He was like world ranked. He was one of the best in the country. And we would always get into this argument about which one was more sophisticated. And I think I won all the debates because you would go, well, chess, you got to think 40 moves ahead and, so many different plays. I'm like, I don't care how many moves you got. The human body's got way more than a two-dimensional board with 16 pieces on it. Like when given half those pieces only do the same thing. Like you're talking about the human body here, movement, and then you add the physical aspect, the physiology. You add the strength and conditioning. You add the emotional stress. It's not the same in other competitions. Like you can have something that's very intellectually challenging, let's say physics, but when you're writing a paper, it's not going to be physically hard. When you're going to present the paper, it's not going to be nowhere near as emotionally challenging as stepping into a cage will be. So when you look at things that are intellectually challenging, I think that fighting is on par with the most intellectually challenging endeavors on the planet, except that it has layers of extreme sports, like, or sports that are very difficult, like let's say gymnastics, for example, or rock climbing, which are very advanced, but I don't think rock climbing is probably really technical, I imagine. But like other sports, I think in terms of technique, they can't touch fighting because there's so many different ways you can approach it. It's really infinite times infinite. And I know I'm biased. This is just me speaking here. Like people, I'm sure, like anyone.
It's interesting to me that the notion of a chess player, like I'm sure, even though you don't normally see a world champion chess player who's fist pumping or talks trash like Conor McGregor or is super animated, right? It's more reserved, even in victory. But I just can't imagine that the feeling of dominating someone, like for me, if I was to dominate both of you at chess or 100 people at chess, that brand of domination doesn't feel nearly as fulfilling as and this is the thing where a lot of people out there who've never wrestled, who've never done jiu-jitsu, who've never put on a pair of boxing gloves, who've never done any Muay Thai sparring or never done any judo, they're not going to get it. When we talk about like the thrill of dominating or the thrill of domination, a lot of people are intimidated by that. Like they're like, that's almost like that dark side within us as that primal side. People are just scared of that. It's like, well, wait, if we're encouraging the thrill of domination, if we acknowledge it, then society's just going to go off a cliff and it's going to be cruel. And we're going to have those groups you were talking about in Brazil with the jiu-jitsu guys that are terrifying everybody, going into clubs and going on the streets. And so it's almost taboo to talk about, wow, like the thrill, the way that, the code for, I love the thrill of domination. I just love dominating, like how awesome it feels. The code for that is, hey, I do this because I'm competitive. I'm just competitive. So you're allowed to say I'm competitive. You're allowed to say that, but you're not allowed to get in front of a mic and say, bro, one of the best feelings in the world is to feel your opponent break, to feel the struggle and to feel them slow down and to feel them quit. You can't say that. It's like, what's wrong with you? Are you sadistic? Are you a sociopath? Like you're kind of a menace to society.
Because we're I mean, we shit on honesty. We don't like honesty. That's the truth of the matter. anyone who speaks bluntly is going to be punished for that. Like you got to say, you got to word things in a way that are acceptable. But you're right. Like it's just code. You're just euphemism. We just wrap it up in a beautiful package and you're saying the same thing. But if you give the package unwrapped, people are like, oh, how dare you say that? And now you're punished for saying it in a way that did not sound good to their ear. I lean towards, speaking bluntly and honestly. I think it's easier to communicate that way. Like I don't like to fluff things up too much. I think it just slows things down and it just doesn't really do anything. And I don't know. But I see what you're saying. Like, and the truth of the matter, every person on the mat there is trying to beat, we're all trying to beat one another. We're all trying to be the alpha dog. But when you word it like that, it sounds incredibly arrogant. But isn't that what we're all trying to do? Like whether it's business or in school, whether it's, whatever
the car people are driving, the cars people drive and speed
isn't that what we're doing? I mean, so if it's something we're all doing, it's something so human. Like, why are we in denial about it? Why is it that the truth about who we are so painful to digest? Like, why do we have to wrap it up with like layer after layer after layer of ideology? Like, okay, let's prevent the truth from coming out. Like, what is wrong with being who you are, competitive? Like, it's something that's frowned upon almost. But
Let me ask you this, because you alluded to something that we should talk about because you had a front row seat to it. So the modern person now training jiu-jitsu, the people who came along later, someone like you as a pioneer, I was in jiu-jitsu earlier. We were in jiu-jitsu before it was popular, before it was cool, before it was in vogue, before people were all over podcasts talking about sign your kids up. We were in it when there was no prospect of money, right? We were in it when it was the love of jiu-jitsu at its purest. And you were there at ground zero in Brazil because you spent a lot of your years in Brazil. You have dual citizenship in Brazil and the United States. And a lot of people don't know that once upon a time, jiu-jitsu had a bad name. Brazilian jiu-jitsu had a bad name in Brazil. That it was very elaborate on that, because a lot of people, and then compare that, juxtapose that with today, where jiu-jitsu is painted as this panacea that can cure the world, and every kid should be in it, every cop should train in it, and it's all these warm, cozy, jiu-jitsu is awesome, jiu-jitsu is the best, jiu-jitsu is the answer. But many decades ago, like you're talking about Brazil, it was like, wait. Like this is a dichotomy. Once upon a time, it had a very different image. Tell us about that, and then tell us about where we are, I guess, today with where you see jiu-jitsu as a people builder, at building people up, teaching them life skills on and off the mat.
So, there's no way you can separate. I can ask this question without looking at the history of the sport, right? How it splits from judo, right? Judo comes across as Judo markets itself as a sport for children, as a means of education. They want to be in school curriculums. They are in the Olympics. They have an image to uphold. They have government support, so therefore PR becomes an issue. You can't have hooligans representing judo, so they're supposed to be the good guys, right? So they have all this massive influx of cash from governments and from the private sector that are funding the sport, and the sport, to remain that all that money coming into it, they need what? They need to maintain a good image, right? And a bad image is not going to go well with that, with an Olympic sport, a sport that is supposed to be a means of education. And then on the other end, you get the Brazilian version of judo that we now call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, primarily led by the Gracie family. How do they shine in that environment? How do you stand out when you're up against millions of dollars from government and private sector, when you're up against an Olympic sport? How do you shine? Well, we know how to fight. So how do we do it? We start challenging people. We challenge this martial art. We challenge that martial art. We dojo storm. We'll pick a fight on the beach. We'll pick a fight on the streets. We'll fight on the streets all the time. In fact, we're going to train our students to fight. So when they fight on the streets, make sure our guys win, and we become the bad boys, because it's better to be a bad boy than to be a no one. If you had to choose between being a bad boy or being a no one, being a zero, you would rather be the bad boy. And that's sort of their mindset. So they create this Spartan culture. That's how I refer to it, the culture. And it builds off the Brazilian machismo culture, which is already very prevalent. The Gracie family is unique in that they kept a very, I have no other way to describe it, but it's just like a military-like discipline, Spartan culture within the family of combat. Like, we're going to fight and we're going to win, and we're going to prove that our version of judo, what they call jiu-jitsu, is better than what everyone else is doing. They create this culture of hooliganism, basically. The thing is, at some point, they can't control it. When Hoist wins in '93, the Pit Boys, they were a wave that had started in the 1930s, 40s. This goes way back. And they couldn't stop that wave. So now that they're mainstream, now they're on American television, they're opening gyms across the U.S. in the late 90s, early 2000s. They have to change that image. We can no longer be associated with hooliganism. And it took a while for that to stop, but that wave finally waned down. And now we're trying to sell jiu-jitsu with a completely new image. We are trying to be what judo was, because now we have tons of cash flowing into the sport. We have families. We have jiu-jitsu is viewed as a curriculum, as part of an educational curriculum. So we're trying to rebrand the sport, and this is what's been happening the last 20 years with a lot of success. Because when I mentioned this past of hooliganism to most practitioners, they're shocked, like they have no idea. And like, I'm not that old, and I remember well what it was like. So there's definitely been a change. Economics change everything. Like, I mean, you come down to things like, not to be too cynical, but these things come down to money. You start dumping money into the sport, which is what happened in the last 20 years, and you're gonna get people more concerned with PR and public perception. And on the other hand, you lose the Spartan culture. That's the other side of this. So you have that Spartan culture of strength and in combat, and it's hard to get a belt, and you fight on the streets, and you dojo storm, and you have that. And then the second you start becoming a more commercial martial art, you lose some of that. So some of the intensity of combat is lost. And on the other hand, you're making a lot more money from the sport. The sport has never made so much money. So these things balance each other out. Like, I don't think it's better or worse. I think it's just a natural progression and evolution of the sport. And that's how things go. They come in waves, man. They rise and they fall, and then something new comes about. And I think it's going to be the same with jiu-jitsu.
I'm told that the same thing, that same arc, happened in the traditional martial arts, like the Chinese martial arts and kung fu and karate, etc. That originally, going back decades, that some of the kung fu and the karate and taekwondo, they were producing a lot of badasses, but it wasn't commercially viable. It was like you were intent. It was too intimidating of an environment for people off the street, and people were scared of that. So they started to dilute the standard. They put 2 and 2 together, especially when they came to the United States, and realized, look, if we can dumb this down, if we can just make you punch the air, right? If you can just do katas and just do form training, and nobody gets hurt, and there's not even necessarily any contact sparring at a lot of gyms, then the Americans love that sells. And then pretty soon there's karate gyms popping up everywhere because it's safe, and so it's commercially viable. But a lot of, as you're saying, we would call the word Spartan, a lot of that sort of that warrior ethos or that Spartanism gets lost, or even the actual fighting skills. Now we are producing, Robert, jiu-jitsu and the combat sports are producing more badasses. The level of jiu-jitsu is better than it's ever been. But that's because of the sheer numbers and popularity of the sport. If you look at probably the average black belt, like if you look at the average black belt now versus the average black belt back when you got your black belt, or even when I got mine in 2010, when there's probably less than 3,000 Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belts on the planet, like the quality to get a black belt back then, it's like, I mean, it was probably a higher quality than whatever the average is. I can't prove this, but there does seem to be some dilution in terms of, you go into a lot of academies. There is the perception, I guess, that, hey, a lot of this is being done for commercial gain, and that in general the quality is diminishing. Like I don't think that the average black belt, so let's go back to TEDx talk for a moment. When I gave my first TEDx talk in 2016 with Misha Tate and Anna Lynn Molina, when I gave that, of course it goes up on YouTube, and then some people like it, and then you have people that troll you and they criticize. And one of the criticisms was when I talked about the physical injuries, like what I had to endure to get my black belt, and why I cried so. You saw me, I was crying, why I was speechless, why it meant so much to me. One of the things was the injuries, like the dance with all of those injuries, the dance with all the physical pain. Like I gave my heart and soul. You were there to see me train. Like I gave my heart and soul for 9.5 years for that. And my body was banged up. And so it meant something to me. And then there were people that were like, well, what gym did this guy train at that he had all these injuries? And where was he? He should have changed gyms. Like he's stupid. They don't know what they're doing. And I'm thinking, well, again, because now the standard's been diluted so much, it's like, yeah, these guys are coming along now where there's a McDojo on every corner. And so most people, like the idea of me having all those injuries is a foreign thing to a lot of people, right? Because they're not getting after it like that. And it was a different time and a different era when you got your black belt, when I got my black belt.
Yeah, at the same time, like technically they're way better now. Like there's like the evolution of the sport is. I'm not one of those that go, oh, old school was better. I'm nostalgic about the era in terms of culture. I think the culture was definitely better. I think the culture has gone downhill since, really, it's just been a constant, like it peaked in the late 90s in my opinion, and culture wise, and it just went downhill from there. But technically it's been, it's skyrocketed. Like I have no shame in saying this. I can barely keep up with Paulo Miao and Mike Musumeci when they're going and they're berimboloing. Like, I'm like, wait a second, I have to put it on slow motion if I want to see what they're doing. No shame in saying this. 23 years of jiu-jitsu, and I can barely keep up with the evolution. And I'm not one of those either that says, oh, new is better than old. I don't believe that either. I think more weapons in your arsenal, the better. But I think that 99% of what Mike Musumeci does is Jiu-Jitsu 101. And the only reason why people don't see it is because they're focused on the stuff that they don't know, and they make that the whole story. But that if they focused on everything he's doing, 99% of his Jiu-Jitsu is very, very basic. So the whole idea between old being worse than new is just stupid to me. There's no distinction. There's the same thing. It's just an evolution in terms of
new is built on old. New O's, whatever new is, was built on the back of old, the trial and error, the guinea pigism of what we did. Whatever new is, new owes a lot of us a debt of gratitude that we were out there troubleshooting, figuring it out, making it popular. So as the new owes a lot of people, the pioneers, like a big debt of like, hey, thank you for pushing the envelope and showing us what's possible. And I think a lot of what's new is the technology is there, like I said, to rewind it and watch it 1,000 times. And the numbers are there. Anytime you start having millions of people training and you have the accessibility, there's a gym within a 10-mile radius in every major city. There's a bunch of gyms. I mean, the level should be just by the sheer number and the sheer availability of videos. And Robert, there's a tournament you could do now. If a young Robert Drysdale, you used to have to drive a couple of hours to practice. You were in Brazil. There were times when your commute was like 4 hours up and back, whatever, to get to training. Okay. Nowadays, I mean, you have the accessibility of it. It's just there. It's like you don't have to go very far to get it, right? You don't have to bend over backwards to get it. It's been handed. Whatever is beautiful about it, it's handed to this generation on a silver platter, buddy. If you want to be good at it, you could do 3 tournaments a week now. If you were 17 years old and your mom wanted to drive you, you could do probably 3 tournaments a week, brother. You could have did a tournament a week during COVID. During 2020 COVID, you could have still, in the United States, you'd have found places, you could have did a tournament a week. I mean, you should get good. Like me, when I was starting, it was like, you were lucky. In 2003, I used to have to drive 700 miles from Utah to California and back to do a tournament. And there was like, licking your chops if there was like 5 or 6 tournaments. It was like in some guy's garage would be a tournament, right? They'd get a few people together. Like it should be a higher level now. There's a tournament every week in every major, almost every major center in America. Like it should be way higher.
Yeah, I always think it's cute to me. I used to get angry at it. Now it's just funny to me when I see like some purple belt that is super proud of everything he knows off YouTube. You know, like to me, it used to be like, man, you're an idiot. I get angry. Now it's just like, you don't realize how stupid you are. It's just kind of funny because they're overly proud of something they didn't do. Like they're standing on the shoulders of giants and they don't even know it. It's just like the ignorance of it to me is just funny. But you're right. Like it was handed. It's much that even though technically it's far superior, you compete a lot more, and it's far more competitive in a lot of different dimensions. It is easier in the sense where these tools are available. Like before you had to make an effort to learn something new. It was a lot harder to learn something new because you didn't have any references. You had to go watch a tournament. You didn't even have camera. So, I mean, you could have like one of those VHS cameras. It was a pain in the ass and no one had it and no one ever took them to tournaments. So you would have to remember what someone did and try to mimic that at the gym the next day. Like, what are they doing? And you try to go over it based off of collective memory. So you get a group of 4 or 5 of us and trying to remember who so-and-so was doing. And then we have to come up with a strategy. Now you pull it up on your phone and it's done. I don't think it's better as before. I think today it's a lot easier. Certainly it's improved. But I do think it's quite ridiculous when someone wants to take credit over something they did. Whenever I see that, I always realize, because I'm a big proponent of merit. You know, I think that merit is necessary. It's important. And when people are trying to take credit over something they didn't do, to me, it just shows how ignorant, you know, the young generation really is in terms of its own recent past. Very recent.
Robert, if you're a world-class competitor today, another thing, financially, I mean, I remember when you opened your gym and, you know, you attracted, you know, world-class jiu-jitsu players, UFC fighters were training there. There was like a core of like, the first couple of years you had it open, there was like a core of like 30 of us, right? Badasses on that mat. Like there were like hardly any regular people. It was just like UFC fighter, top 5 contender, world champion, Pan American champion. You know, it was just studs. And I remember you didn't know if the gym was going to make it. You're like, I don't know. You know, you're running out of money. You didn't know if you were going to make it. And now fast forward to today. So you're worried about, how do I pay the rent? How do I, you know, world-class guy there, 80cc champion. How do I pay the rent? How do I pay my gym rent? How do I pay my rent? How do I pay my car payment? The people today, if you're a world-class competitor, you don't have to sweat the rent the same way too. So you could be all in on your art. You could train 2-3 times a day, teach a class, whatever. It's a different world. And like I said, it's a silver, and God bless a lot of the incredible competitors out there. God bless them. But it is if you're a hard worker and you're an alpha and you're competitive, it's a silver platter compared to what it was 15, 20 years ago. It is, I mean, it's 10x easier. The training is just as hard, but everything else around it, paying your rent, making money, monetizing it, you know, all of the things that come with social media and having 300,000, 500,000, 1 million followers, it's a whole different world. And my point here is not to undermine the young, great athletes out there, some of whom I know and who I love and I respect. That's not my point. My point is they better realize, they better knock themselves upside the head and show mad respect for the old school, because it was all built on the back of the old school. That's my point.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I just want to, you know, add one thing. In some ways, it was harder before, Frank, because you're right. There was less money, there was less exposure, there were less tournaments, there was no YouTube, there were no, like, very few instructionals. On the other hand, there were less fights too. It was less competitive. Like, it's become more competitive in the sense where, you know, a stacked division. When I was a purple belt, a stacked division, like Brazilian championship, would have been like 5 fights. Right today, like it's double that amount. It's 6. So I've seen 7. I've seen blue belt, middleweight.
Do you think Leo Vieira could have competed in this generation with all of the same advantages? With, you know, All YouTube
I-
at his fingertips.
I think Leo Vieira would have had another 2 or 3 Leo Vieiras in there just as good as him. And it would have been because there's more people. More people is going to bring more phenoms, right? It's just natural that you're going to have more phenoms. So there was less competition in the sense where we had less people practicing and less high-level guys that were fully invested in the sport like we were. Now there's a lot more people that are doing this full-time. So it's more competitive in that sense, even though the tools at their disposal are a lot better.
But Robert, if you were like, so now if you go into some academies, you've got 15, 20 black belts on the mat in some really good academies, sometimes more black belts, right? I mean, there's 20, 30, whatever, 40 black belts on a mat. So the cumulative knowledge there is so much better. Again, it's an apple to an orange, because how do these kids, these phenoms benefit from 30 black belts on the mat? We didn't have 30. We didn't have that. We would have learned quicker too. And I still think that the most driven of the era 20 years ago, 25 years ago would be right there with the most driven of today. And they would just have had more resources available to them. The people that are the type A, that were living it, that were driving like you were 2 hours, they might not have been world champions, but they would have still been in the conversation because they wanted it. They wanted it like no other did. And they would have had a lot more resources available to them to reach those dreams. You're right. Can we say that? I mean, even Rafa Mendes, because Rafa Mendes is sort of like a tweener. He wasn't in, those guys are a little bit younger than you, but you go watch Rafa Mendes, he's a little bit later, right? So he's kind of in between the old school and the new school. But tell me, Rafa Mendes would, a young Rafa Mendes, if he wanted to be like, would he not be a world champion because it's so competitive now? Like, I don't.
No, I don't believe that. I just
think the guys competing for world championships in any era.
When the thing is, the pool of, I'll give an example. We interviewed Jean-Jacques Machado the other day, who's going to be the narrator for the documentary, right? And I asked him, I suspected this, but I wanted confirmation. I was like, what was the biggest tournament in Rio de Janeiro, which was the mecca of jiu-jitsu in Brazil, right? The biggest tournament was called Copa Company, right? And how many competitors? I asked him. He said about 200. That was the biggest competition in Brazil in the early 90s, had 200 competitors. Now, any IBJJF tournament today is going to have close to 1,000, just to give an idea. And sometimes they do 3 a weekend. So my point is, it's been handed on a silver platter. You're absolutely right. But in the 90s, there were a lot of people that would go to football, soccer, judo, and wrestling, and gymnastics, and volleyball, or whatever. Then now, due to the growth of jiu-jitsu, a lot of these very athletic-driven individuals are coming to jiu-jitsu. So now you have more Rafa Mendes than you did in the 90s. That's all I'm saying. And in some ways, like, it's not that Rafa wouldn't have won, but he just would have had other guys to split those titles with. So you're going to have, it's more competitive in the sense where you have a lot more people training. Like, the number of people training now is, how fast is it growing? I don't even know. I wish IBJJF had numbers on this. I don't think it's easy to measure. I think we're still
They do
behind.
have numbers. They just don't share the numbers. They have the numbers. They don't share the
No,
numbers.
they have the numbers of, like, people registered with them, but I don't think they have numbers of overall practitioners. I think about maybe 10% of my students are registered under IBJJF, maybe less. I think the vast majority of jiu-jitsu practitioners are not on IBJJF's radar. The vast majority, like, I'd say 90% at least, if not 95%. Like, they will never compete in IBJJF tournament, and that's the vast majority of practitioners. So it's difficult to measure, because in judo, at least, they register, I think, all their students. So I think they have better control of how many people they have practicing. Jiu-jitsu is not there yet, but I think we're still behind.
How many black belts do you think there are? How many BJJ black belts do you think there are in the world? Nobody I know has that number. How many do you think?
I have 150. Me, I have over 150. Just me, Robert Drysdale. Over 150, just to give an idea. So
if you had to wager a guesstimate, how many in the world?
Hundreds of thousands.
You think so? No, I'm thinking 40,000 ish.
No, I don't think so. I have 150 alone, just me, 150. There are people in Brazil who've been teaching for 40 years, man. Like, Paulo Rezende has over 300. He's a friend of mine. He's got them read. He's got an Excel spreadsheet with every single one of their names. 300 plus people, legit.
Wow.
I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know. I could be way off the mark here, man. Like, just to give an idea, I registered my black belt under IBJJF in 2004 when I got it. I think my number is like 2000 something. So in 2004, registered, they had 2000 some black belts. That's in 2004. So now, I mean, at least 100,000. I'd be surprised if they're less than that.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I want to. I mean, this is something that the sport should have. By the way, this should be a number that a lot of us. I mean, this is just show you we have to get organized in some way. But I do want to say this about I want to make it absolutely clear that there is no questioning. I'm not an idiot. There is zero question that the level of jiu-jitsu is at the all-time high. This is the best it's ever been. This is the best level, and that it's that the major tournaments are super deep and the talent level is sick. And in 10 years, it's going to be even more sick. There's no question. I mean, that's not what I'm arguing. I mean, that's just very clear that the level in the UFC octagon is the best it's ever been. Jiu-jitsu wrestling. I mean, the level of collegiate wrestling. This is the best wrestling we've ever seen. They're doing, you've got some weight classes in collegiate wrestling. You've got like 10 guys that could win the national title. I mean, like there's weight classes where it's like any one of 10 could win this thing, right? And some of them, it's like on any given day, 8 could whatever. So there's no question there. I guess my perspective is the perception. What happens is when the young generation, the new generation comes, in my opinion, and what I'm saying is they tend to crap on the older generation, like, well, that was easier, and that's the old jiu-jitsu, and they tend to just sort of belittle it as in like, But my thing is like, it's it's part of the building, a lot of the troubleshooting, we were guinea pigs. We had to figure it out. It was hard, and we did the best with what we have. It wasn't like we didn't have. I mean, I wasn't barren bullying because it wasn't. It really wasn't. It wasn't widely available. Maybe if Mikey Musumeci was my training partner back in 2003, I'd have been this phenomenal barren bowler. Maybe if heel hooks were allowed in IBJJF in 2005, I'd have been this great heel hooker.
But here's the other thing. Like, this is what a lot of like the young generation missed this out on. They create this hierarchy, once again, old and new, right? I reject that hierarchy entirely. I don't believe in any of it. I don't think a barren bowler is better than a half guard sweep or a closed guard sweep. I think it's new. I think it's interesting. I think it's important. It's a welcome. It's an addition we should all welcome. But to say that it is better than a closed guard, I just reject it entirely. It's not what I see. It's not what I see. I watch competition and I see probably more sweeps from closed guard than I do barren bowlers. And it's just that people hyper focus on what's new and they ignore whatever doesn't suit their case. It's confirmation bias. But if you looked at the overall pattern, the overwhelming majority of what's being practiced at the highest level is old school jiu-jitsu. What we refer to as old school jiu-jitsu, things that already existed in the 80s, 90s. That's the overwhelming majority of it. It's just that we focus on the highlight. The highlight is what stands out. I watch high-level competition all the time, and I see jiu-jitsu 101 all over the place. It's just, it's just missed. People, they just focus on what they want to do.
Yeah, this is what's interesting about jiu-jitsu too. I remember, and this still happens, if the UFC has like some crazy armbar or some, Ryan Hall doing, an Imanari roll to a heel hook. And once you see that, like it happens in a UFC fight, the following Monday, people everywhere around the world in gyms are training that sequence, right? If somebody hits this sick armbar in an IBJJF tournament, then it becomes the move du jour for the next whatever. And so then it's a season for arm bars. But to your point, these things come and go. They ebb and flow. There'll be a season where there'll be some great guard player. And then for a while, people will say closed guard's the greatest thing in the world because one person does it, captures people's imagination. Then it becomes a wave. And then, gyms are practicing in it. And then something else comes along. And then it just kind of gets recycled. All these things get recycled to where it's like, 10 years from now, armbar, I thought like when I remember I went to a tournament in California when I was a white belt and they threw all the white belts. And so there were so few tournaments in 2003 that they threw all the white belts with the blue belts and nobody protested. Like today, some coach would be like, oh, hell no, you're not throwing my white belt in with the, and they threw us up like they mixed like 3-weight classes, right? They put 16 guys. They said, white belts and blue belts, you're together. You're 140, you're 150, you're 170. You guys are all together, right? Today, the coaches would freak out, right? But anyway, we go there, and I got armbarred by a guy, Nam Fan, who was a blue belt. And I got armbarred, and I got my arm popped because I didn't want to tap. So I took him down, I picked him up, and then I thought, wow, look at me. I picked him up, double leg, whatever. And then we landed. There was a sequence. He's hanging from my arm. Like an idiot, I didn't tap. So the referee could hear my arm popping. Pop, 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 pop. I didn't hear it because I was just seeing red, and I was thinking there's a way for me to get out of the armbar. So the referee stops it. I ice my arm. Ice my arm. I had 2 more matches, double elimination tournament. Anyway, when I came back on the ride, I had a set like a 600-mile ride back or whatever to Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was going over in my head, okay, my arm's popped. It's going to be, probably 6 to 8 weeks before this thing heals. I can't be getting armbarred like that, right? And so the best thing that ever happened to my armbar defense, Rob, was getting my arm popped, because that made me like, hey, I got to learn to defend arm bars. I got to be smart about that. I can't just be popping up to my feet and extending my own arm, whatever. But the point there was that there weren't, in that 4, 5, 6 years, it wasn't, I didn't see, at least in the tournaments and where I was, I didn't see a lot of great arm bars. So I was thinking, man, I didn't have the faith in arm bars as much, because where I was in training and what I saw in the magazines and what I could see, I didn't see people like arm barring people left and right. So I didn't believe, even though I got my arm popped, I didn't believe like arm bars are this phenomenal weapon. But you go now and you see like some people are just so phenomenal at it. And it's like, if there had been YouTube back then and I had seen a bunch of people doing phenomenal arm bars, I probably would have spent a lot more time working arm bars, right? Like, and it's just, so now it's anyway, the point I want to make there is that incredible respect for the younger generation. They're doing phenomenal things. The level is definitely better. It's a great time to train jiu-jitsu. It is great for kids. I believe in it. You've got a great kids program there, Rob. I believe in it. The only point I'm making is, like you just said, don't act like we're reinventing the wheel in all these ways. We're not. We're combining things a lot of times that already existed. They just weren't as popular. They just weren't as well known. There wasn't a camera in the room, right? There wasn't a camera in the room to see some of the things that were being done. There wasn't some loud athlete who's great at marketing, shining a light on every move. But a lot of this stuff, these are moves that were being done years ago. And now there's just a camera and a light in the room, and someone who has a magnetic personality or who has a lot of success is getting people to pay attention. That's the point. And respect what we went through at a time when it was pure, when there wasn't money, when we were still trying to figure it out. And when I think in general, I personally still think, Robert, that I think that in some ways it would have been easier for me. If my objective was to get a black belt, it wouldn't have been easier for me competing. It's harder to compete now because the talent level is deeper. But I think in a lot of ways, if I just wanted to get a black belt, it would be easier for me to get it today training. If I wanted to take less damage and whatever, it would be easier because I could find a lot more gyms where I didn't have to go through the Shark Tank. I didn't have to go through the gauntlet. There would be a lot more gyms available to me if I wanted to take an easier road to the black belt. There's a lot more of that avenue available to me now than there was back then. That to me it seems very clear.
Yeah, there's that's definitely true. It's gotten softer. That I miss. I think I think the culture that's gone downhill is that it's been impacted by the overall cultural shift in the world, and it's gotten very soft, very, very soft. Like I mean, I was watching that. You guys watched that Cobra Kai series on Netflix. I saw only like a couple episodes, but it was very nostalgic, right? Because I used to like Karate Kid when I was a kid. And there's like the sensei. He's like the guy that I can't remember his name, but he fought Daniel's son, and now they're trying to frame him as the good guy, right? And the way he talks to his students is hilarious to me. Because it's like, that's how my coaches used to talk to me. just talking shit, calling me names, calling me stupid all the time. If you did something wrong, if you got taken down, it wasn't a correction. It was, you got called names, you idiot. Like, get over here, you moron. That's how they talk to you. And I don't mind. I mean, I was never offended. I don't mind. But today, it's like, oh, are you are you going to be okay? It's just, everyone's so sensitive. I think the culture has taken it's gotten worse in that regard. But just going back to a point you made a while ago, how everyone goes by fashion, right? Like they see something, it's the greatest idea ever. And then, because it's being done. And if it's not done clearly, it's stupid. So the truth is what the majority wants. So if many people are saying that, flannel shirts are cool, then they are. If the majority say they're not, then of course they're not cool, right? So knowledge, truth are not binded by accuracy, reason, or logic. They're binded by the opinion of the majority, which is easily popularity, very easily manipulated, right? Which is a terrifying thought to me. I think that's one of the most terrifying features in human psychology is how easily mass psychology is manipulated to the left or to the right, forward, back. It's mass psychology. I think one of the most terrifying things about ourselves is the fact how easily we're swayed by what other people are doing. And I see this in jiu-jitsu all the time. I see it in MMA. Someone does something, like I always use this as an example. So Anthony Pettis throws that spinning kick at WEC and knocks out Ben Henderson, right? He knocks him out. He's a genius. He does the same thing, slips, lands on his head, knocks himself out. He's an absolute moron. So it's the criteria is not the attempt of the technique itself, is whether you were successful with it or not. So now everyone's trying, and that move is the greatest move ever. I always recommend this movie to my students because I think it makes the point. I'm not a big fan. I don't watch many movies, but every now and then you find something that really rings a bell with you, and it's a movie called Moneyball with Brad Pitt, and he's a baseball coach. Have you seen it? It's a really good film. But basically, in baseball, they were just hiring people based off of their based off fashion, right? Like whatever tradition was, that's what we do because that's what people before us did, so it must be true. And then, the main character, he goes along and says, wait a second, let's look at the numbers here. What do the numbers say? So he starts hiring people based off statistics, which is the most intelligent way to look at it. Like you would think that's how coaches and managers will look at things, based off of numbers, not based off of public opinion. But that's not what's happening. Long story short, he revolutionized the sport, changed things forever. And I don't see that in fighting. That's what's interesting to me. Like no one thinks that way in fighting. It's all about fashion. And your students demand it. It's a public demand. Like my students want to learn what's popular, not what necessarily is happening in tournaments. Like there's an enormous gap there between what is popular and what is actually happening. And you see this all the time. Like, oh, this camp is the most successful camp in jiu-jitsu. And I'm watching, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, there's nothing there. Like, this guy is the greatest grappler on the planet. I'm like, what? I mean, because he said it on Instagram, so it must be true, right? So you get this, in some ways, and I argue a little bit about this in the book, the internet and social media have made us less informed, not more informed. And it's unfortunate because it is a tool for information, but somehow it made us more ignorant and more confident in our ignorance.
Let's shift gears now and let's talk about the actual TEDx, which I had expected we talk about sooner, but we got caught up in this, and this is an interesting topic. I mean, because I'm interested, like your documentary, the history of the sport. I'm interested in the evolution of the sport, and one day, the athletes out there, by the way, who are the new athletes, who are the new wave, or the new blood or whatever, one day they're going to be the old school, right? There's going to be some new blood coming 15, 20 years from now, and they'll be crapping on the old school, or crapping on the basics or whatever, and then the athletes right there who are the new school, so they'll be in my shoes at some point. Let's talk about TEDx talk. So it's not easy for anybody out there watching. It is not easy to just get yourself a TED or TEDx talk. It's challenging. Usually you have to be nominated by someone. It's a great opportunity. Not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody wants to be up on stage. Robert, we got a little lucky. We were able to get you a TEDx talk here in Las Vegas. That's going to be out, I guess, in a couple of months. The topic of that, basically, one of the themes of that was, what's the point of winning? And basically, as background, I alluded to this when Noah and I first started the podcast, that, you know, you are a guy who's, you know, you're ultra competitive, you love winning, and you hate losing, and you know, you did this for a long time at a high level. You've coached world champions, and then at some point you still feel kind of empty. You're like, wow, is the juice worth the squeeze? Why doesn't this feel better? Why doesn't this thrill last longer? What's the point of this? Like, what's my identity? What's my identity beyond fighting? We got you the TEDx. We got it abbreviated, by the way. So we didn't have a lot of the other TEDx speakers. I think there were 24 TEDx speakers at that event. And I think, to my knowledge, almost all the other speakers had months, some of them more than 6 months to prepare. You and I were very abbreviated on a crash course. I think we maybe had 5 or 6 weeks. So, and this is not a speech that you'd given somewhere else. It's not like you were running around for years giving this speech. We had to kind of get this thing from scratch. So tell us, I guess, about the process. Why were you interested in doing a TEDx, and why this topic?
I think the topic has always been on my mind. It's not a new theme to me. Like, what's the point of winning is something I've been asking myself since I was a blue belt, perhaps. Once I realized that, like, there's always going to be another bigger tournament. There's always a bigger one. It's like you start thinking about these things, right? So, so it's been a theme I've been fascinated my whole life. I've always leaned towards thinkers that are trying to answer that question or thinking about it. And I don't think there's a perfect answer. I have my ideas of what I think are good answers, but I don't think it's a satisfying answer to everyone. But it satisfies me to a large extent. Like, I feel satisfied with some of the solutions I find to this problem. But it's well, the TEDx was like more of like a challenge thing. Like, I thought it'd be cool to do. I'd never done anything. I've never given a speech before, other than in front of my students or at seminars, and I talk to them about topics that I think are relevant to their growth in martial arts. But I've never been, done anything beyond that. I think that I don't think that the lack of time. I mean, honestly, like, the way my mind works, there's no such thing as a home run. Like, I don't even like to watch. Some people would think that, like, oh, you like to watch the tournaments you won and watch yourself. Like, I don't, because even the ones I won, all I see are mistakes. There's no such thing as a home run with me. Even had it been the best performance ever, I think that I would have still been disappointed with myself, because I'm going to see the mistakes. I can't blame the time or lack of preparation. I can say a few things. I think I could have done better. First, I was overconfident. 2, the speech changed too many times. 3, I didn't practice in front of people enough. I thought that practicing in my head was the same as speaking to someone. Really lack of experience in this. And I think that was it. The other thing too is, there's something about public speaking that I just made myself aware of. A lot of it is acting. Like, there's a big component of acting in it. Like, it's body language and how you present it, and it's not from the heart. It's something that's largely memorized, including the body language is memorized. So I think that takes time and training, or some people are just better than others. Maybe I'm not a good actor. I don't know. But, like, there's a lot of acting in it. And it's not that the message isn't real. It's that it's been polished so much, it's lost its rawness. And raw is more where I would excel, I feel like, maybe. Or I do better, at least, maybe not excel. But I mean, I had a lot of fun with it, man. Like, regardless of, I never did this for the views or popularity. Like, I mean, I've been invited to do more, and, like, possibly, other, public speaking gigs, and something I'd be interested in. But if it doesn't, like, I've made my peace with, I found like a really happy place in my head, man. Like, I'm just really content with who I am and what I have and where I'm at, and whatever comes. If it doesn't, I find challenges in books. I find challenges in business now. I find challenges as a parent. Like, I find challenges everywhere. I don't need the stardom and have a mediocre career to be like super famous and rich. I mean, if these things come, they come. But if they don't, I don't admire. When I look up to people, like when you look at like someone who's really, for example, someone who's at probably the pinnacle of that business, let's say Tony Robbins. I don't admire him. Like I don't think anything of the guy. I think he's got nothing to say. I think he's an empty shell. He's a very good actor, but he's an empty shell. Like there's no content there whatsoever. So like, do I want to be like that guy? I'm like, hell no. And then I look at other people in the fight industry that are doing really well, you know, and I look at them and I know some of them really well. And I'm like, do I want to be like that guy? I'm like, hell no, I don't want to be that guy. So like, I'm happy with how I live my life. There's some things that I need to improve, but like if it happens, it happens. But I think that, you know, definitely, at least pertaining to the theme of winning, it's something I have lived. It's not lip service. I've lived that life of being frustrated with your accomplishments. Like it never ends. Like you still, you know, it doesn't matter how much you win. You don't get around that. But there are solutions. I think there are ways around that that give meaning to what you're doing, regardless of satisfaction with that win itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I have had this conversation. The same thing when I watch the TEDx talks that I've given, I cringe. I have trouble. You know, you said to me, I think, you know, hey Frank, I'll watch my speech, you know, once or twice, and then I'll look at what I could do better. And then you're not going to sit there and incessantly rewind it and watch it. And I have a hard time. I'm proud that I gave the TEDx talks. I feel very fortunate. I put a lot of time and effort in that. I love the process. I love being on stage. I love the people I met, but it's hard because I'm such a perfectionist. It's hard because just like you, I mean, same thing with grappling. When I watch videotape of myself, it's like, if you show me a match where I'm out there for 5-6 minutes on the mat, I could literally, I mean, there's 20, 30 things I'm like, should have did that. Posture here, posture's bad there. The guy, you know, there was a single leg there was a this there. Same thing with the speech. You know, you watch it. But this is where, you know, you and I had this conversation afterwards, Rob, because sometimes when you come off stage for the TEDx, you don't know what to make of your performance, right? You haven't seen it. You're so in the moment. You're up there, and you come off, you're like, God, I feel like I just bombed, or I feel like I sucked, right? And sometimes we can feel like that after a fight, right? Even if we win, it's like, God, I was pathetic out there today, because we have this awareness of like, hey, I didn't nail my ending. Hey, I forgot to add, you know, I had this part of the script or this part of the speech, and I didn't include it. And so we're aware, our brains, and I think most people's brains are wired like this. We're wired to focus on what we didn't do, or the negative, or the mistake we made, rather than all the things that went well. There's something about the human brain that likes to do that. And especially it does that with the ultra competitive people, the perfectionists. And so, you know, and that's why you have all these armchair critics, people on their couch, people in their basement, right? Keyboard warriors. It's so easy to sit there. You're watching a football game. It's an 80-yard pass. The wide receiver has it. It goes through their hands and they drop it. And you're like, everybody should, you know, and it's 30 degrees outside, right? It's 30 degrees. The athlete is diving. It touches their fingertips and then they don't catch it. And everybody is like, wow, you've got to catch that. And it's like, what percentage of people with another defensive back draped on you, 30 degrees cold, you're running, you're diving, what percentage of the human population is actually going to catch that thing? Same thing with like high level jiu-jitsu. Like it's easy to sit there, or MMA, and say, oh, it's the easiest thing in the world. It's the easiest thing in the world to watch your speech when your speech comes out, and for someone to be like, he should have did this. He should have did this. But when you're up there, right? When the lights come on, I mean, nobody's perfect up there, right? Like nobody's perfect. And so what we have to take away from it, like I said to you after yours, it's like, bro, you're part of a less than a 1% that are ever going to give a speech like that on that kind of stage. And having sat there and watched you, and let's go into to what you talked about, but having sat there and watched you, for a guy who's basically a rookie speaker, right? And we had an abbreviated time to get that speech done there. it is a scripted speech. Both you and I are very good unscripted speakers, from the heart speakers. This was a scripted speech, which anybody out there, scripted speeches can be really tough, especially if you're the, like, you know, you're just the machine like you and me. You're an expert on your topic, and you don't want to be handcuffed into scripted, because scripted can kill the emotion. It can kill the heartfeltness of it. And so I thought, all things considered, man, I mean, you were comfortable on stage, you were credible. And I think, you know, because of COVID, there wasn't a live audience at the event where we were. A lot of times there's a live audience, and you know, the speaker can feed off of that. But there was no live audience. There were like 50 people who were affiliated with that TEDx event. But I can say this, Rob, everybody who was sitting there was definitely, you commanded them. Everybody was listening. You had a lot of credibility on the topic. And everybody, it was compelling. Everybody had to listen. I think everybody listened for the 10, the 11, 12 minutes, whatever it was that you spoke. You had everybody's attention, and you know, just you had the presence, you had the stage presence, and it's especially impressive for a TEDx speaker. So we could sit here and punch 20 holes in what you did, and we should have did this, and we should have organized the speech. We could do that all day, but let's talk about some of the things that you revealed, because you were very candid. You made some admissions there that even a lot of people who know you, you know, might not know what you were going through. Some of the darknesses, some of the challenges you'd mentioned, even, you know, at your low point. Tell us about some of the things that you reveal in that TEDx, and why I feel okay to put that out there.
I never have a problem opening myself. Like, I've always called myself an open book. Like, I don't have anything to hide, in the sense where, you know, like, I'm proud of who I am. So whatever comes across is genuine. And I think big change for me, you know, somewhat recent, like, and it's a lesson that we all pay lip service to. We all talk about it, but it's something that it's very difficult to absorb. And I think I've gotten a lot better at it the last few years. If people like me, they do. If they don't, they don't. Like, some people aren't going to like you. It's just, I think I used to try to be a people pleaser in the past, and it just backfired on me so much. I'm kind of content with who I am. I'm not perfect. I know I'm aware of some of my flaws. I'm unaware of others. I think I can be very arrogant at times, because I tend to speak openly. It comes across the wrong way. And sometimes when it sounds like I'm fishing for compliments for being overly humble, when in fact I'm just being sincere. You know, and that's the price. I think when you're blunt, I think that you're going to come across as overly humble and fishing for compliments on one end, and overly arrogant, overly confident on the other. But it's who I am. Like, I've made my peace with that. Like, some people aren't going to like you, and that's fine. I always tell myself, like Jesus got crucified. You can't make everyone happy. You can't. You can't. Some people aren't going to like you. It's fine. So for me to speak openly about who I am is not something that I have an issue with. Some people think I do, because they always think it's a touchy, because, like, you know, for example, speaking of my drug test, which to me is a meaningless event. It means nothing. I mean, it is what it is, but people obsess over it, because, I mean, it's funny, because whenever my name comes up, that's the first thing people like, at least on Instagram sometimes, like, someone immediately have to remind me of that. In the meantime, there are other people that failed 3 drug tests, but they don't talk about that. People will find the one thing about you that they don't like, and that's going to be the whole story. And that's fine. That's the open forum that the internet has become. Everyone is entitled to an opinion, I suppose. But I don't have an issue talking about it. People think I do, but it is what it is. I know where I made a mistake. I know that I lied on my drug tests, but I never had a physiological hormonal advantage, and that's a fact verifiable by documents. That's not up to debate. That is science. It is mathematical, and I have the documents. It's not up to debate. But I did lie, so therefore I am wrong, and I am wrong by principle, not for any other. I am wrong for lying, and that's the end of that discussion. But there was never a advantage, because my hormone levels were very, very low at the time of the fight. So at least pertaining to free testosterone, which is what counts. A lot of people don't understand the difference between epic testosterone, total testosterone, and free testosterone. They're all very different things. Don't take my word for it. Ask an endocrinologist; they'll tell you the same thing. But so people think like, Rob, like this is something you should approach because it's something that people wonder about. I'm like, I can talk about it. I think the whole problem began when I never made a public apology. Like, well, Rob, you have to make a public apology. I'm like, I'm not going to apologize. Apologize to my coaches. I'll apologize to my friends and family. I'll apologize to the people near me. I'm not going to apologize to strangers. They never done anything for me. What am I apologizing for? Because I upset you? Oh, boo-hoo, some professional athlete failed a drug test. I am outraged. You sitting on a couch eating potato chips. You want my apology? Well, you can go to that place, right? Go F yourself. So that was kind of my attitude, and I stand by that. I don't owe anyone an apology. That's why I never made one. Like, what is this? I have to apologize? Like, I don't owe you anything. So I think that led people to think that it was still like something that I hadn't tackled, and it's not because I'm scared of talking about it. I'll have this conversation with anyone. I'll have this conversation with you, Sad. I'll have this conversation with anyone, really. Like it's something I'm open about because I know where I stand. I know where I erred, and I know where I was unfairly portrayed because once again, it's not up to debate.
But at the time, it was devastating for you. It was devastating to be cut by the UFC.
Honestly, it was devastating in some ways. At the time, it was because I didn't want to. I saw something. Obviously, it was my career, but it was. I think what hurt the most was how shitty people are, even people that are very close to you. And you realize, oh my God, like it's very quick how people move away from you. It's very interesting, like when you're on top of the world and you're going to be the next UFC champion, and how everyone wants to be your friend. Everyone like, that's my guy over there. That's my guy. I'm his friend. Look, we went to school together. Look, I'm related to him. Look, the picture we took together. And the second you're not going to be Conor McGregor, then all of a sudden they move away from you. Like, oh, I never met you. No, I don't even know who you are. You're not my friend. And how quick that was the biggest. It probably would really turn me off from show business in general. Like, why would I put myself in the position to be judged by people who never tried? I value my work ethic too much. I value my history too much. I value my integrity too much to even allow myself to be put in a position to be judged by the pros. And I hope I don't sound arrogant here, but I fought very hard my whole life to achieve things. I was never handed to me. Like I wasn't born rich. I was not a talented athlete. I had to drive for 2 hours for practice. I had to take 3 buses at some point. It never stopped me. And to see people on the couch eating potato chips demanding an apology and outrage for judging me, it's like, I'm sorry, but I refuse to allow you to judge me. I will not give you that power. So I think that was a big light bulb moment, mind-opening moment for me about people in the world in general. And it was very, very healthy. Like, I'm very thankful for it because it put me in a mindset that set me on a different course of how I saw myself and how I saw the world. It was necessary. There was a missing piece there. And it had been missing my whole life, and I was maybe I had other opportunities to learn these lessons, but I think I needed like a hard wake-up call to learn it. And I wouldn't change a thing. Like, I mean that. Like, some people think, I was just talking to someone yesterday about this, and like, if I could change places with UFC champion, I wouldn't trade places with them. I mean that. Like, I value the lessons way more. There's a concept that I got from Nietzsche, where he calls it amor fati, which means love of fate. And I think it's his way of being at peace with the world, because he's such a driven, outrageous, angry writer. He's such he calls it the philosophize with a hammer. That's what he calls it, right? He's got no issues attacking everyone and everything. But at some point, when you're that driven of a thing, you have to find peace with yourself. And he finds it through the concept what he calls amor fati, which means love and faith. you love your fate, the good and bad. The good you enjoy, the bad are lessons you grow. And it's something I really took from his ideas because that's kind of how I try to look at things like that. If I fail, it's not for lack of trying, but I think it's a very good way of looking at things that are out of your control. You can't control everything. Some things are not going to go as according to plan, and you can dread on it or you can learn from it, accept your faith, move on, use it as something to grow on. And that was sort of like the theme of the talk. Maybe I didn't come across that way. Maybe I didn't express it well because these are things that are, they're some things that I enjoy thinking about. I spend a lot of time thinking about them, but maybe they're not interesting to other people. But to me, this is how you defeat ambition, is making your peace with the end result, enjoying the good as moments of ecstasy because they don't last long. Enjoy them. And then with the bad, you use them as, fuel for growth. There's nothing else you can do.
How did you, I already know the answer to this, but Noah doesn't know, the viewers don't know. Talk about, a lot of people would have would be terrified to go and give a speech, even if they practiced. It's, a lot of people are just nervous. That's terrifying to them. I know that you're very confident, and I know that you feel very comfortable on stage. You've given seminars. You've had plenty of students where there have been 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 people in the room. But nevertheless, for people out there who do wrestle, who do struggle with public speaking or standing in front of people and talking, what's your advice? What works for you to go up there and to feel confident and to deliver when the lights come on?
I wasn't good. I remember my first jiu-jitsu class I taught. I was replacing an instructor, and he was moving, so he was with me, and he had to jump in like 3 or 4 times to help me because I was stuttering so much. And that was a class with like 7 people in it. So it didn't start out well, but you get better at it over time. And I think my recommendation to people is, I think we allow other people to judge us too much, and it shouldn't matter. And I don't mean this in a way where you should be a narcissist or a sociopath and not care about what other people think. But the most important opinion is the one you have of yourself. I always try to remind myself of that. What I think of myself is the most important opinion. And if I'm happy with who I am, if people like me, do. If they don't, they don't. And I think when you have that mindset, you walk up there, if people are going to judge you and they think it sucks, it doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt me. I don't give a shit. You cannot like me. That's perfectly fine. Nothing changes in my life. I think that thinking too much about how you're going to be received on the other end is a character flaw. You should work hard not to give, not to care. Just let it be. It is, go out there, speak, be yourself. Whatever happens, happens. Let the chips fall where they may, like you say, and that's perfect. That's amor fati. That's let the chips fall where they may. Whatever happens, happens. But I think to people if they get nervous in front of crowds, is that they're so focused on how other people perceive them that they can't focus for a second on what they're actually saying. And I think that hurts the message, and it certainly hurts the talk. I think in my case, I think I was a little nervous because I think deep down I wasn't prepared. I don't have a problem with crowds. I remember getting that question when people were like, "Oh, Rob, was it like fighting in the UFC?" And I'm like, "Listen, man, I could have 5 people watching or 5 million. It makes no difference. It doesn't. Big crowds never intimidated me. It's just more, I think, familiarity. And I think I think being confident in front of a crowd is one thing. Being confident to deliver something you've never done before is a very different. It's a skill, and I think that's something you have to hone, something you have to perfect. You don't get good at something overnight, even if you're good at something else. Anything you do requires a lot of practice, and I think that's true for. What are the odds that someone's going to walk in their first jiu-jitsu class and be great at jiu-jitsu, right? Even if you're very talented, you're still going to suck. You're not going to be good your first class. So I think that's true for everything. I think maybe I was a little overconfident. I could have spent more time practicing. I think the problem too is I'm the last 2 months or the last month maybe it's probably the busiest month of my life. Like I'm working 12-hour days, sometimes 15. I'm doing with a lot right now. I spend my day in front of a computer. So how do you practice and focus when you're doing all that? So the timing wasn't great. Probably could have practiced more, I guess. But I'm happy, man. Like I'm not upset about it. Whatever comes. Like I'm perfectly happy with whatever. I know I can get better at anything I put my mind into, and I'm very, very confident about that. I don't have any insecurities about, oh, I can't do this. Like I know myself. Like if I get my head into something, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to do it well. I truly believe that. I believe in the point of delusion. Like I think if I put my mind into something, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to get good at it. So everything, that carried out.
Is there anything, Robert, that didn't go in the speech, in your TEDx speech, that in hindsight, if you were to give the speech today, that you would have added, or anything you might have subtracted?
I think I made some changes to the closing of the speech. I think I would have changed some things in the body of the speech. I think they were poorly delivered. The closing of the speech, I think it was, you have to memorize that last paragraph, and I didn't. I was just winging it, and it wasn't a great delivery. I suspect my body language. I look down a lot when I talk because I'm thinking, and I look down when I think. And when you're a speaker, you're supposed to do this and talk to people and look them in the eye, and that's good public speaking. When I see that, I see a good act. I see acting. I don't see speech. I see acting. And it's very difficult for me to do that because the second I start doing that, I start focusing on how I feel like a phony. It's like more me calling myself a phony in my head the whole time. Like, Rob, you're such a fucking phony. So for me, it is very difficult for me to do these things because it is not something, it doesn't feel genuine. I guess that's why.
Yeah, it's interesting for people who've never actually given a public speech. You have speakers that they will do everything right technically, right? They know this hand gesture that fits what they're saying, and they look to the left, they look to the right, they look straight ahead, and they've got, they've written this awesome speech and yet it just seems so robotic and mechanical. It just doesn't, it's not as compelling. It doesn't grab you. Then you've got people that are technically, kind of like, reminds me of John Jones. John Jones, I say this to people, John Jones is arguably the greatest mixed martial artist of all time inside the cage, right? We could argue, is it Khabib, is it GSP, is it him, whatever. We could make that argument. But he's arguably the best ever. And if you watch John Jones, it's a bunch of what not to do. You would never gather like 100 students around and be like, this is your foot movement. This is your head movement. Do this. John Jones is a freak. He is a unique freak. He's got a great mindset. He's an incredible athlete. He's daring. He's brave. He's blessed with length that you can't teach. And it's like, technically, it's like, oh my gosh, let's put in a John Jones video. Well, you shouldn't do that. Your good coaches teach you, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. But guess what? It works. It works. And the same thing with speaking. You have people that are technically phenomenal. They've been doing it for years. They go to Toastmasters and they're nailing all the techniques that are taught in all the good books. And you're just like, eh. Then you get somebody up there that's just so authentic, so raw. The story is so great. They create empathy, and you're just dialed in, and you're like, you follow them for 15 minutes and time stands still. So it is an interesting thing being up there where, like you said, it's interesting, Robert, both you and I, before our TEDx's, wrestled and grappled with the fact that this is a scripted speech, because you don't want to do a completely unscripted TEDx or TED speech. That is suicide, and the organizers, rightfully so, not allow it, right? They have to know, what are you going to say on our stage? You're representing our brand, right? So you can't do it unscripted, but then the scripted is like, oh my gosh, it's like, so there's that dance between how much scripted, how much unscripted, preparing so that, you don't memorize every single word. Like, you don't want to do a verbatim speech. I mean, you don't want to be like, okay, I wrote 2,000 words and I'm going to go up there and give my speech verbatim. A president of the United States might do that, right? A politician would do that. A head of a Fortune 500 company would probably do that. But that's not from the heart, like you said, for people like us that are, especially from the fight sports, where it's like, be your true, authentic self, and like, no, that just feels like, it feels gross, right? So that it's interesting. That was something like an 800-pound gorilla for you and for me, where it's like, you're sitting there reading and you're like, okay, how do I not sound robotic? How do I read this, memorize this thing and not sound robotic? But then if you go off script, let's say you dare to be in the moment and you dare to go off script, the danger there is when you're on the TEDx stage and it's live and they say go, please welcome to the stage Robert Drysdale, Frank Forza. Once they say go, you got one take. There is no, this is not Hollywood. There is no take 2, take 3, take 4, fumbled my line. They can edit some things out. They can, but by and large, if you mess it up, it's just messed up. So there's a danger if we dare to go off script with that. But let me say this, Robert, as we wind down here. I know we're getting at the end, Noah. And I want to let Noah get a chance to ask a question. One final thing, Rob. What do you kind of alluded to this, but what would be an ideal outcome or impact? What would make you happy as a result of that TEDx speech? Would it be people reaching out to you? What would make, I know that you don't always care as much about what other people think, but still that speech could change your life or shift your life in ways we're not even aware of. It can. I've had people from Turkey and Ireland and other places reach out to me. They find me via email. Sometimes they become clients. Sometimes they just, whatever. They make you feel good and say whatever. What in an ideal world, what would the impact of that speech be?
I don't know, man. That's a good question. I think, look, when I got into the documentary and the book thing, everyone's asking me, right? Like, why are you doing this, right? I think some of it was my own. Some of it I like history. Some of it is perhaps vanity. But I also wanted people to know their history. Like, I think these things all coexist. They're not mutually exclusive. I wanted people to pick up a history book and like understand where we come from, for example. With the speak, I think it's not so different. Like, I like the challenge. Perhaps there's a degree of vanity. But I would like people to maybe learn something and go, okay, I never thought of it like that, and maybe give these things some thought. Because what I see, I used to be able, like when I was younger, I used to think that the biggest problem in the world was poverty, right? And then I started thinking, perhaps it's human rights, or perhaps it's, whatever the world's problem. You think about what are the biggest problems in the world, and you start thinking about these problems, right? I think the biggest problem we have today is like I see that people are obsessed with success, and they don't even know what success means. Like, you see people like really striving so hard to be rich and famous, and then every rich and famous person I speak to, and I know many of them, they all tell me the same thing. They're like, I don't feel great. Like, I'm not that happy, They don't say it, but they say it, So I'm thinking, okay, if someone who's a billionaire doesn't feel like they've accomplished enough and they have enough, if I become a millionaire with an M, right? M as in monkey, not B as in bull. What makes you think that I, as competitive as I am, I'm going to feel any better than I do now? Like, it's not going to make me feel better. And I'm getting that from people who have billions, and they're basically saying exactly that. And I've met these people. And then I've met people who have won way more than me in Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. And same thing. So I'm thinking, all right, clearly, that's not it, right? So what is it? So that's the question. And I think that for everyone, it is a different answer. I can't tell you what answer is the right one for you. I can maybe what kind of works for me. I recently read a book by Harold Bloom. I think he passed away recently. He's a Yale literary critic, right? And the book is called "Take Arms Against the Sea of Troubles," right? He gets that soliloquy from Hamlet, And he's basically, he's basically arguing the book using literature as a means of fighting nihilism. And I thought that's a really good way of put it, because we all deal with this. Everyone's dealing with like questions of existence, whether you realize it or not. Everyone's got a different answer. For him, it was reading. It was reading high literature, reading the classics. He spent his life reading Shakespeare and John Milton, right? For him, that was the answer. For some people, it was music. Like I remember when I saw an interview with Ozzy Osbourne when he was describing himself as a teenager, and he listened to the Beatles for the first time. And he remembered thinking to himself, that's it. Music is the way out. And for Ozzy Osbourne, it became music. For some people, it's jiu-jitsu. For some people, it's making money. For some people, but you need to understand that whatever that you're chasing, you got to give it some thought. Is this what really going to satisfy me? Like I find satisfaction in teaching class. I like reading. I like writing. I like music. These are the things that make me happy. If anything comes from them, they are side effects of my passion, but they're not. I don't think that chasing fame and money are going to make me feel better about myself, is what I'm saying. And I could be saying this because maybe I lost my ship to be a UFC champion and make millions. Maybe that's why I'm saying this, could be. But observing champions like I have, being around them, and the rich people, like I've been around rich people, I don't think that's the answer.
Really quick, because you told this story on a previous podcast you and I shot. I encouraged you to put it in this TEDx talk. I encouraged you. You did not. I had it in one of your original drafts of the speech. You took it out. But tell us really quick, because this ties in to this theme of insatiability. Tell us the story, the Frank Mir story of the fisherman, really quick. Tell us that story. You and Frank Mir, the former UFC champion. Tell us the sort of the metaphor, the paradox of the fisherman story. Tell us that. So you and Frank, I'll set it up. You and Frank are sitting around, and Frank tells this story.
Okay. I told this story recently. I don't remember where it was. It was a different pocket. I can't remember what it was, but the story goes, the fisherman, is doing his thing, right? And the rich businessman is just, he's in Cancun on vacation or whatever. She walks up to the fisherman and he goes, how much do you fish every day? Like, how long do you fish for? And he goes, about a couple hours. Like, really, how much fish do you catch? He's like, about 2. And he goes, okay, so what do you do with them? I'll take one home, take the other one to the market, and I'll trade for whatever I need. I was like, really, that's it? I'm like, yeah. Why don't you fish more? I'm like, why would I do that? Well, you fish more, you can catch more fish. And why would I do that? Well, you can go to the market and trade for new things and maybe sell it and make some money. Well, why would I do that? Oh, if you have money, you can buy more rods and you can fish even more fish. Why would I do that? Well, more fish, you make more money, and then you can buy a boat. And then if you make more money after that, you can buy many boats and you can start a business that sells fish for the whole world. Why would I do that? Well, if you become really rich, then you can sit around and fish all day. So that's the moral of the story. Like, it's, I think there's, I think I mentioned this in the talk. I got this. This is from Hamilton. You're chasing shadow. That's what I call it. You're chasing a shadow. You're not going to catch up to it.
Yeah, I love that story. Noah, we're winding down here. I'm so sorry. We got wrapped up because him and I bonded and did this TEDx thing. Just went through that TEDx experience together. You've been sitting patiently. Any final thoughts, Noah? Any final question from you, my friend?
In the 4 years when I was serving active duty in the Marine Corps, I got exposure to a bit of a philosophy in the Corps where at every rank, we were assigned recommended reading to do as part of our development of Marines. And the reading list is different for officers and for enlisted. However, it was very insightful to me. Recently, we had a Navy SEAL on the podcast, and he expressed something that I found very fascinating with how they develop Navy SEALs in their buds during Hell Week and beyond. He said that individual instructors were cautioned against taking unilateral actions on their students, and instead, what he said to do was to trust in the curriculum of the making of a Navy SEAL, because that's what will produce. That's what we want. Trust in and let the system work itself. My question for you is, where does the study of Sparta and Stoicism fit in the curriculum of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner? And have you thought through at the various belt levels how there are different lessons as they apply to the ranks?
Good question. I think the rank thing is just arbitrary. Like there's no such thing as we put it like we cut it very purple brown, but it's at the end of the day. I'm not one of those. I used to believe that by the time you get a black belt, you're going to be a better human being. I've seen the opposite. It'll get worse. They train jiu-jitsu, they train MMA enough, and they become worse. I've seen both. So I don't believe that is it's there's certainly evolution in life. There ought to be, but belts don't necessarily represent that evolution, even though in theory they do. But I think you can have. I think you can have a Spartan mindset. There's nothing wrong with pursuing and achieving, but at some point you have to acknowledge that it is the pursuit, that the piece is in the pursuit, not in the end of the pursuit, right? I think that's where the concept of amor fati comes in again. You're pursuing for pursuing's sake. Like the hard work is the reward. Like I tell my students, you're not gonna. That's where you find satisfaction in then pursuing. Like when you're competitive, that's what it's pursuing that is the reward. There's no way around that, and that's where you find your peace. You're not gonna, at the end of it, there's no such thing as happy ending when at the end of the rainbow, man. Like that's a myth, So that's my solution to the problem. I think that the accepting that you're not going to achieve all your goals is a very important lesson. You're not going to achieve all of them, but also taking pleasure in the challenges that you are facing immediately. What is immediately in front of you, and at the end of the day, being proud of who you are. Like maybe I didn't achieve everything I wanted, but shit, man, that was a good life. I live well. Like I do what I love. I'm surrounded by a lot of people. The good people gave me tons of good moments. The shitty people taught me a lot of important lessons, and I'm thankful for those too. And you take the good and the bad, and they're two sides of the same coin.
Thank you. Frank, do you have
gentlemen?
By the way,
we're at time.
This is just me. Like, no, who knows, man? Like everyone's got a different approach to these things, so I don't think that my interpretation is better, or it's how I.
That's all it is. That's my life prism too. It's just what's the best Robert Drysdale's got for us today. It's a look at your journey. Nobody is sitting here saying the world needs to do this. We need to impose this on everybody. We're giving our perspective. But you are a very thoughtful guy, Robert. You're a deep thinker. You've been in the trenches for a long time, and I always like hearing your opinions, even when we don't agree. I like hearing your opinions. You are sincere. You are authentic, and I hope people out there, that TEDx talk will be up in a couple of months. I know it's going to be all over. Follow Robert Drysdale on Instagram, and I'm sure Robert's Instagram, Noah's Instagram, my Instagram, Frank Forza. You'll find when that TEDx talk is up, we will give everybody a heads up on social media. So, gentlemen, there's some NFL football on. Robert, it's great having you on. Of course, we're going to have you on again at some point in the months ahead. I'm going to be spending a lot more time in Vegas, so let's do more podcasts. Noah, have a great rest of the day, gentlemen. I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Take care, Frank.
Bye, guys.